So we'll get started. So good morning. We're going to look today at aquatic safety and risk management, and one of the areas of camp that probably has some of the highest potential for incidents and risk, and look at some of the ways that we can actually reduce that risk over time. So if you guys have questions, make sure you just kind of interrupt me as I'm going along. So we'll quickly just kind of acknowledge our connection with the USDA and our look at civil rights as being an important component of camp, and making sure that we're reasonably and start looking at the agenda. So we're going to talk today about waterfront safety, which also includes things like drowning, spinal injuries, and some of the statistic that goes with that. We'll talk about the principal causes of drowning. We'll talk about staff certification and training. We'll talk about management and in-service training, and then documentation of that training. A little bit about facility design, including things like having access to an AED. There are a couple laws that do impact waterfronts in Washington and across the nation. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about abuse prevention, and then there are aquatic safety checklists that are available from American Camp Association and then other sources. So the one kind of Washington kind of promotion is with life jackets, and our policies even talk about the need for use of life jackets. I know that at Camp Neighborly that everyone is supposed to bring their own life jacket. We do have a requirement that where we're responsible for where their life jackets are being used, that those life jackets fit appropriately. And we need to make sure that the life jackets are matched for the type of activity that especially youth are going to be part of, and then needing to set the example that we know that life jackets protect everyone in, on, and around the water and can save lives, and so we need to set that example and then make sure that we enforce it.
And actually, I think we have some grant money. I think we're purchasing. I don't know whether it was going to be enough for everybody, but I believe they are purchasing life jackets. And so we will have camp life jackets this year.
Oh, good. Good. Okay. But make sure that they're available and that they're within the guidelines, U.S. Coast Guard guidelines for any of those life jackets. When we look at drowning, we know that drowning is a process that has respiratory impairment from either submersion or immersion in liquids. And drowning can be interrupted by rescue. If we look at the kind of the Washington state and then also the U.S. trends in drownings, this is per 100,000 by year, and for ages 0 to 19, we can see that there's been a pretty good decline in Washington on the rate, and that we're still and have been for the last several years below the U.S. average. And so part of that is just the awareness campaigns that have been done in Washington, and then just kind of really good diligence especially by camps in Washington. Just looking at how big an issue drowning is in the nation. So on the average, about 3,500 fatal unintentional drownings per year. That's non-boating related, and additional 332 people died each year from drowning in boating related accidents. And for the numbers that do drown, about 1 in 5 are children 14 and younger. And for each child that does succumb to drowning, there's another 5 who receive emergency department care for non-fatal submersion injuries. And the issue with even the non-fatal submersion injuries is that more than 50% of drowning victims treated require hospitalization, and then the complications that are that come from that can be things like severe brain damage and long-term disability based on drowning. So drowning is a big issue, and drowning can happen very quickly and can be very devastating to county programs. We have a legal responsibility that facilities are maintained, and that where we allow swimming, that youth are safe, and that we've done our due diligence to make sure that safety precautions are in place, as well as that personnel are appropriately trained on their job during swimming, and that we basically have folks who are trained in rescue and have proficiency in managing the waterfront to make sure that we don't have any issues. We also have requirements for medical screening of participants, and we ask for liability releases. And then we have a requirement to swim check everyone, and that includes staff and adults prior to allowing them to participate in swimming and boating activities. And then we're also legally required to have swimmer management systems in place, so ways that we're protecting youth and adults who are swimming during the time that we have responsibility for them. And part of that swimmer management system is also making sure that we have fences or lines around the swimming area that designated when it's not open. That's an important aspect of safety, is making sure that campers know when not to be anywhere near the swimming area, and that there is secure management for folks during the time that they're swimming. So making sure that we're doing all of our due diligence within the swimming systems. Typically for drowning, there's several factors that can influence drowning. One would be unsafe conditions. Another one would be unsafe acts that happen. And then errors in judgment, either by the victim or by those that are responsible for watching the victim. And ultimately, the responsibility for health and safety of the program participants, the visitors and staff, falls to the camp director and staff and or faculty that are responsible for the program. So as part of the annual intent to camp, and then also the risk management plan, aquatic programs, any of those aquatic programs, need to have their risk management planning and responses outlined and as part of that process. The aquatic program liability extends beyond just the water and the dock. It has to do with behavior, with access, as we talked about, making sure that when the waterfront is closed, that there is some kind of a barrier in place that prevents easy access. Slip hazards, glass or other sharp objects in the water hazards. And then we also extend that liability and responsibility into the locker rooms and changing areas for protection of especially youth at camps. So a lot of it has to do with hiring practices, and we can actually do some vigilance in the hiring practices that helps us with reducing some of the liability that we may have with the waterfront activities, looking at who you're hiring and what are their certifications. Camps hire lifeguards. The lifeguard certification is a 2-year certification. It doesn't automatically continue after the 2 years. Folks actually have to take a certified refresher course, and if they allow their certification to lapse, then they're required to retake the entire lifeguard courses in most situations. So one of the things that we need to do is make sure that we are hiring certified lifeguards, that you're following up on their reference checks. You actually physically see and make a copy of their certifications. And if you have a lake that you're swimming in, then they should have an open water certification. And basically what that open water certification does is it provides additional training to the lifeguards so that they're prepared for the type of rescues that happen in a lake as opposed to a pool. So those are some of the kind of nuances with certifications. And we'll look at the camp standards in a few minutes. But typically it's going to be the American Red Cross is going to be the main certification provider. YMCA, Boy Scouts of America may have some certifications, and as long as they are the equivalent of the American Red Cross, and they generally are, then you should be in good shape. The other thing that we're required to do is not only have them have certifications, but provide them with a job description, and then to verify their skills. So it's not good enough to just say, I've got a lifeguard certification card. Someone at camp actually has to verify their skills and should document that their skills have been tested and how they've been tested. And then
Mike, I got a question on that one.
Sure, Dan.
Doesn't that just seem a little overkill for me if they have a certification card by Red Cross typically, that then we're going back and rechecking?
We're still required to look at their skills, because some of the research on lifeguards shows that their skills, it may be a year and a half since they've taken that class, and whether or not their skills are up to the expectations of doing the job can be difficult. So typically it's not going to be much more than just the pre-staff training that that your camp would do, and just an opportunity for the camp director to observe the skills of the lifeguards, or your aquatic, if you've got somebody who's in charge of the waterfront, that they would do it. But yeah, we still have a responsibility to verify that they have the skills that we're expecting them to.
Mike, what if, the lifeguard is if there's nobody at camp that has the expertise to evaluate the skills, because the lifeguard is actually the most knowledgeable of the people that happen to be there.
So the person who's in charge of camp still has that responsibility to give them a job description and to verify that they have the abilities to complete that job. So the camp director can, basically it's very easy to find the checklist of expected skills of a lifeguard. And if we're putting that lifeguard person into the waterfront management position, then there may be additional job responsibilities that you're adding onto them. But having a certification gives you the knowledge that person has gone through at some time and been tested on those. But we have a responsibility to make sure that we can document that we've seen them in action, that they can do the skills that are necessary.
Well, I don't disagree with that. I have a fundamental issue with that a little bit, and it's not against you, Mike, by any means. But the same theory could be applied to a driver's license. You know, if you
Sure.
took a test, you got your certification. I took mine when I was 17.
Right.
I mean, I got to go in for an eye test, but that's about it.
Yeah.
So while I understand what you're talking about, I think it's another layer of administration that we're taxing oftentimes a volunteer to do these.
Sure. So ultimately when we hire a staff person and we give them a job description, then through the organization, the responsibility for checking those skills. And so if somebody was going to drive a camp vehicle, then yeah, I would definitely want to at least do some kind of an orientation and some kind of a training on how to use a staff vehicle. So yeah, I would do that. It's just another layer that says, yes, we've done this, we've done our due diligence to make sure that folks have the skills that are necessary to keep kids safe. Yeah, I don't know what else I can say about that, Dan, other than, yeah, we have a responsibility to, when we hire folks and put folks in those responsibilities, that we need to make sure that we've done our due diligence to make sure that they're coming with the skills that are necessary to perform those tasks. The other question is, who manages the aquatic program? And is that going to be a 16-year-old lifeguard who's managing the aquatic program, or is it really that camp volunteer or another or a staff person who's helping to make sure that the waterfront program is managed adequately? So it does get difficult, but if something goes wrong, then we need to make sure that we've done what we could to try to prevent anything from seriously happening. So it's aquatic programs are a difficult beast, and probably one of the favorite things for kids to do in camp, but one that has the greatest potential for harm to campers, especially if it's not managed well. So in looking at the staffing things, so some of the things that for the aquatic folks and lifeguards, the pre-employment screening, kind of knowing what their experience has been, verification and certification, making sure that they're physically up for the job, that the vision is not an issue. They probably have had their hepatitis B test as a lifeguard, and then skill testing, things like opening, clearing airways, strategies for keeping lifeguards alert, and making sure that there's the adequate staffing. Making sure that we've got the emergency equipment, which includes communications, and that you've got a weather policy, especially for the waterfront, that when the waterfront is going to be closed because of lightning or threatening weather. And then making sure that there's the emergency response equipment there, the reach, throw, row, go, and that the folks who are working at the waterfront have actually practiced simulated rescues using that equipment. Some of the other things that typically are available at the waterfronts are going to be if you have access to an AED, if there should be first aid and CPR supplies, a backboard, of course, life jackets, lifeguard tubes, and then throw devices. And those are pretty much standard life-saving equipment that's available at any of the waterfronts or the aquatic facilities. Facility design, we don't often get the opportunity to kind of redesign or to change things, but at a minimum, we should, even if the facility doesn't have these available, but we should make those available. One is, what are the rules at the aquatic facility? What are the requirements? Need to designate the swim areas. And then if there's things like boating and diving boards, blobs, which are kind of launching devices. Hopefully nobody has those. They scare the bejesus out of me. And then things like log rolling, that there's specific risk management guidelines and emergency response, as well as kind of training kind of opportunities. And then for tripping and swimming, so even if we go off to another location to swim, we still have a responsibility to make sure that the folks that we take on those trips, that they're safe, and we still have liability for protecting them with lifeguards and spotters, and making sure that those folks are trained and aware of their responsibilities. So this probably won't apply to anybody who's on the call now, but there is a Virginia Graham A. Baker Pool and Spa Safety Act. Basically what this does is requires that all public pools or spas have a single drain other than an unblockable drain for it to must employ one or more additional options. So basically what that means is that in a number of drownings have occurred historically from folks being entrapped by the suction of drains. And so this law basically puts a requirement in to make sure that pools are safe, and that the suction from the drain can't hold a swimmer underwater down at one of those drains. But in most cases, we're using lakes, and it doesn't really apply. Especially where we have the changing areas, both before and after, we need to make sure that we're aware of and looking to make sure that we've got actions in place to prevent any abuse. So our general background checks, the pre-employment screening, and then the review and check references, making sure that we're doing our due diligence and checking those references.
Mike,
go ahead.
It kind of relates to this, but did Lauren get back to you and ask? We had a question the other day about the State Patrol background check for 16 years and up.
Yeah, so in the past, and I've got to get a new ruling on this from the human resource folks, but if you remember, would have been the year before last, we did a session on employment with Jamie Gekas, and she was saying that any youth who may be in a role where they're in charge of youth and not supervised by adults, that they would need to have a background check. And I think she had went down as low as 14 if we had them in those roles. But in the past, I've heard the 16-year-old rule.
That's what I remember, but we couldn't find it written. And I said, well, clear back from Pat Boy's days, anybody at camp, anybody 16 and up.
Yeah.
The reality is, if there is an issue and it was juvenile, we won't see that anyway. No,
you won't. But going through that check does show our due diligence. I've got an email into Human Resources waiting to see what the current view would be. And then it may also be an impact from what Christy Axel has been doing with the background checks as to whether or not we can do that for camp each year or not. So
yeah, my understanding after the last one was if I did the background checks last year and they're coming back, that we were stick with that we couldn't run it again until we got word otherwise.
okay.
But any new ones that I don't have in a system, so.
Yeah, it's on my list, Karen, and I'll follow through with both Christy and with the HR folks. So when we look at the 4-H camp standards as they're written today, so they do require swimming programs to be supervised by a qualified lifeguard, and talks about the certifications. And then lifeguards are needed when an activity is conducted in or near bodies of water where a camper could be in the water intentionally or unintentionally. And rescue would require the skill of someone trained in more than elementary non-swimming forms of rescue. So basically, it says even if you're near bodies of water where somebody could go in and need more than just a reach or a throw, then a lifeguard would be required. And then the ratio of swimmers to participants is 1 to 25, and that would be the minimum. And that would mean that it was just one activity. So if you've got boating going on in a different location than you have swimming, then you would need to make sure that you've got adequate lifeguards to cover both of those activities. And then our standard also talks about the lookouts, and a lookout would be somebody who's not necessarily a lifeguard, but is trained to help spot and to work with that lifeguard. And that's a minimum of 1 to 10. And we also talk in the standard about the equipment that's needed. And then additionally, there'd be a person with current CPR for the age of participants available for the waterfront activities and swimming activities. So, in my opinion, there should never be a lifeguard who's the only person in charge of the swimming area, just because if that lifeguard has to react to a situation, it is going to require additional supervision for the remainder of the youth and to get them out of the water and away from that activity. So just keep that in mind as you're thinking about your swimming activity for the summer. And then all waterfront swimming programs must have rules for participation that are posted. And then typically as part of the orientation to the camp, these rules are gone over again. And then making sure that we're using the buddy system and that everyone who swims has had a skill check for swimming. So even when I teach the log rolling in a pool where I've got 4 additional lifeguards, I still do a swim check on 100% of the participants. And even though we may only be in 2.5 to 3 feet of water, I still do a swim check on every person just so that I've got an idea of their skill level. And because folks will tell you that they can swim, adults will tell you that they can swim and swim well, but the reality of the matter is that you need to test them in the water that they're going to be swimming. And it's always a good idea to have some way to delineate them if you've got kind of non-swimmers and swimmers. One of the ways are some of the camp bracelets that folks that you can buy fairly inexpensively. I've also used those with food allergies, so kind of color coding those. those bracelets. Plus, they become part of the kind of the swag that folks wear at camp. I've added this from mainly for you, Dan. Thanks for your question regarding the watercraft, but part of this comes from our standards that wherever we're using watercraft, that they need to be certified, and experience may serve as that certification, but instructor rating in the appropriate craft from a nationally recognized certifying body, or lifeguard training from a nationally recognized body, or other acceptable certification and license. But there are certifications out there for canoeing, kayaking, paddleboarding, or if somebody has the equivalent experience that you can document, that would serve. But making sure that you're documenting their skills and training, not only in instruction, but in also rescue and emergency procedures for that specific activity. And if you are going to employ, Dan, a motorized boat for rescue, then again, you're going to have some way that you're going to provide training to the folks that are using that, as well as instructions for when it's appropriate to use the motor, and then all the precautions that are there. And a lot of it is just kind of the application of common sense in the use of that. But they should have experience, and then have basically you're not going to get a certification in motor boating from any of the standard certification agencies, but that's going to be a determination that you make on your camp as to who's certified to use that equipment and when it's appropriate. So as part of your risk management plan, that would be identified, as well as then documentation of training that the staff received, and then that somebody observes their skills in the use of that equipment. So, Dan, does that help with your question on the motors?
Yeah, it was more not 4-H camp related.
Okay.
More panhandle proper.
Okay.
Related. There had been some. I think there's misconceptions, especially in my scenario, where if there's a 4-H policy, that applies to the entire property. And 4-H camp 1 week out of the summer does not, I think, constitute the 51 other weeks out of the year with the same standards. Yeah. I.e., there was a forest fire across the lake 2 years ago. The camp director didn't have a motor on the boat. They wanted to get a motor, but one of the board members indicated, well, you can't do that because 4-H says you can't have boat motors. Well, it's not a safety thing. It's it's different. It's more of a maintenance issue than it is a safety protocol. So I don't know. It's just different. And I don't foresee using the boat motors for rescues unless we're going to get a swamped canoe. There really is no need to have a motor for safety other than hauling equipment and gear.
Yeah, but I couldn't find anything that precluded motors in our standards. So it's just that it's the same as anything else, that if it's a skill that we're expecting somebody at your camp to provide, then you would need to kind of have some orientation and training, and then observe and document that that they can use that, and then basically the rules for when it's used and how it's used. So but that's all I could find there. But I could, again, the swamp canoe kind of scenario went through my mind when I had read your email that way. So and there may be an appropriate use for that, but
I don't think that stuff needs to be documented in a I used the motorboat to go get a swamped canoe. They're great. Thanks. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Any questions on watercraft? Okay. I'll also copy and put these resources out to everybody, along with the copy of the slides and the recording. Any other questions regarding waterfront? So any questions?
Nope.
Okay.
No. Oh, other than besides counselors, we are still looking for lifeguards. So
Okay.
um,
For camp.